What I'm really interested in around sentiment is the why. Why around a sentiment, whether it's positive, negative, or indifferent, because that's where the actionability lies.
Technology is transforming how we think, how we lead, and how we win. From Intervision, this is Status Go, the show helping IT leaders move beyond the status quo, master their craft, and propel their IT vision.
I'm a river rat. I would rather be in a canoe on a river than just about any place else on the planet. I'm fascinated by how the water moves on its way downstream. As you watch the water in a river flow, you will notice a phenomenon called an eddy. An eddy occurs when the water encounters an obstruction in its path. As it makes its way around the obstruction, a void is created, and the water actually flows back upstream to fill the gap. If the water is moving fast enough and the obstruction is large enough, it can create a whirlpool. By now, you're checking to see if you're really streaming an episode of Status Go or if you accidentally downloaded an episode from the Discovery Channel. Well, you are in the right place. This is Status Go, and I am your host, Jeff Tunn. Today, we are going to be talking about artificial intelligence, machine learning, and yes, eddies. I'm joined by two guests. Amy Brown is the founder and CEO of Authentix. Michael Armstrong is Authentix Vice President of Product Innovation. Together with their team, they are on a mission to help humans understand humans at scale. Welcome to the show.
Thank you, Jeff. Good to be here.
Yeah, thanks.
I'm so excited to have this conversation today. Our listeners know that we do prep calls with our guests before we start, because I always threaten that we should be recording those prep calls because they're usually pretty good. And I know we had a great conversation the other day, so I'm looking forward to diving in. Before we get on the river and navigate our eddies, I'd love to hear about your journey. Amy, let's start with you. Would you share a bit about your background with our listeners?
Sure. So prior to launching Authentix in 2018, I had a really fun career working in the healthcare industry, largely health insurance and the life sciences space. Also did a couple tours of duty in state government, enjoyed that. But a key theme in my career has been working with patient populations and helping the companies that serve them, have an excellent customer experience. So it was really in that tenure of my career that I came to the idea of Authentix. I'm also a mother of 4 young kids. I'm a Hoosier, so I've got a lot going on in my life right now.
And an inventor. I didn't realize that until I was researching for the show, and I've known you for a long time. That's pretty cool.
Yeah, I invented a baby product when my first child was born and got it all the way into big box retail and a celebrity endorsement, and that was all my side hustle. But I learned a lot in the process.
I bet. Now, before we get to Michael, I want to ask you a follow-up question. As we are recording this, we're nearing the end of Women's History Month, and I would be remiss if I didn't ask what it's like to be a female founder of a tech startup.
Yeah, I really value and appreciate the focus on women's history this month every year, and enjoy the reflection period on all the women who have trailblazed, in every industry and every craft, every field. But as I really think about it, what I really hope for our future is that the female part isn't such a qualifier, because there's so much diversity in the tech space that it's just not really a thing. And when I think about my own journey and how I want to be measured, I really want it to be based on how our product is changing the world and the results of our growth, and not that it was because a woman, with the woman part of it.
Yeah,
So,
yeah,
I both value and appreciate the focus on it, but I also dream of getting past this period of time where it almost feels a little bit like a qualifier.
yeah, yeah, yeah. Well, thank you for sharing that, Amy. I too look forward to the day when we don't talk about female founders, Black founders, Asian founders. We just talk about founders. Michael, I'd love for you to share your journey with our listeners. What's led you to the work you're doing today at Authentix?
Yeah, definitely. So my background, my professional background has been in several different industries. So I've worked in hospitality, healthcare, insurance, so a lot of different industries. But in all my experience, I've always been really involved in data, always been very involved in analytics, and I've spent a lot of time sharing that with executives, with leaders, in my experience, in my background. So for me, this is just the analytics space is a very familiar space.
Thank you for that, Michael. Okay, I'd love to solve the mystery. What do eddies have to do with artificial intelligence and machine learning and the work of Authentics? Either one of you, whichever one wants to start.
Well, I'll start with why Eddie's is a thing for Authentics, and then Michael can talk about the AI component of it. When we were getting started analyzing customer conversations, I came home one day after looking at a set of data, and I was explaining to my husband, there's this phenomenon we're seeing in these customer conversations. It's essentially customers who are cycling back, contacting the company over and over again to solve a problem that should have been solved but isn't yet. And I started drawing on a piece of paper this kind of swirly motion. And I'm like, it's wasting so much time on the company's part and effort. And it's driving all this negative sentiment. And it's this kind of customer um, churning effect that we're seeing in the data. And my husband said, "You know what that sounds like, Amy?" And Kevin, my husband, is a white water rafting guide, has been. And he said, "That sounds like an eddy." And so that's really, I said, "Yes, that's exactly what it is." And it just fit. And so now the eddy effect is actually something we measure and quantify the impact of in our product for our clients, because it is a massive factor in wasted customer effort, and we're able to tie hard dollars to it. So it's been kind of a foundational part of our product.
Excellent. Michael, what would you add to that?
For me, it's really just a really great foundation as we implement and we work on different problems from a machine learning perspective. Historically, when you talk about these interactions you might have in a call center, sort of the first thing everybody goes to is sentiment, right? Are you measuring sentiment? Are you reporting on sentiment? And my experience has been extensively that that's not real useful, right? It's not like it doesn't help you to know that, well, this was a little bit negative or a little bit positive, And so when we really started to dive into this idea of an eddy, it was incredible to see how much more information and how much more actionable and how much more insightful it was, even from a machine learning perspective. For us to kind of apply those techniques. And it just helped coming from the starting point being just a much more sort of business or insightful sort of starting point. It really makes the machine learning that we're applying much, much more effective than it otherwise would be.
Well, one of the drawbacks to the technology age that there's been a lot written out about for years is the dehumanization of people. Way back in 1978, Bob Seger even sang about feeling like a number, right? As AI and ML have become more mainstream, we've seen that pendulum swing back. And today it's all about personalization of our interactions. Michael, you mentioned already the sentiment analysis and some of the work you're doing with your analysis of these conversations between consumers and their caregivers. Would you mind sharing your perspectives on the differences between what the analysis is that you are doing and sentiment analysis, and then what sets Authentics apart?
Yeah, I know Amy wants to speak to that too, but I'm going to start, and I'll say it a little bit differently. I come at this from a different angle. What really sets us apart. I alluded to it a minute ago,
Mm-hmm.
which is the starting point. How do we think about the problem? How do we think about the interaction, and how do we think about analyzing it? And so really, that what I'm describing there is context. When we go at anything, right, we're thinking through the context, we're thinking through the problem set, and we're really drawing on experienced professionals in this space. So even something like sentiment, I'm a little bit negative on the sentiment idea, but there's ways you can go at it that I think are just so much more impactful. And just one example is, what I'm really interested in the sentiment side is, how did the sentiment change, right? Remember, we're really thinking about an interaction with a customer. So what I care about is, did it improve throughout that interaction? Maybe it's a 5-minute interaction with a customer. So, if that interaction started really negative, and it ended really positive, at the end of the day, that's a win. That's a really good thing for any given company. And so those are the kind of approaches that we're really taking to ML. Is, let's make sure we're starting with trying to identify something that's really impactful, really useful, really actionable.
Yeah. And what I'm really interested in around sentiment is the why. Why around a sentiment, whether it's positive, negative, or indifferent, because that's where the actionability lies. If all you know is a certain percentage of your population is angry or frustrated, but you don't understand the root cause of that, then it's really useless data. You can stress about your sentiment score, but you can't impact it at all. And that's what I became frustrated with as a leader in healthcare organizations when we looked at our NPS score or we looked at survey scores. It's just not actionable for me. I don't know where to target my efforts. So a really big focus of Authentix is to provide users and leaders with the contextual, immersive insights around the structured data that allow them to take action with a higher degree of confidence that that action will actually impact the
Yeah.
outcome they're looking for.
Now, are you looking at, so if I contacted my healthcare provider and I contacted them multiple times, are you looking at my multiple contacts with them to identify that blockage in the river, so to speak, that creates that eddy? Are you analyzing across multiple interactions?
Yeah, we're typically taking in a high volume of interactions into our speech analytics platform on an ongoing basis. But honestly, the most insightful indicator of eddies is what the customers are saying in the conversation. They will say, without being asked, "This is the third time I've called. I called you. You said you'd call back. You never did. I was on your website. I never got a confirmation email. Now I have to call you." Like, these are all the signs that someone is in an eddy. And we've been able to study that and design our NLP to seek it out.
Yeah, we can usually identify that eddy, just from one interaction,
Yeah.
pretty well.
I've never used those phrases when I call a tech support hotline. Right. This
It
is the
always goes
third time
perfect.
I've called. When we talked earlier, we talked about unstructured data. And Amy, you mentioned structured data when you were describing some of the work that Authentix is doing. But how are you using that data to humanize the interactions?
Yeah. Yeah. So we know that it's really important to turn very messy, unstructured data into structured data because that is what helps leaders, users understand kind of the size and scope of a problem, right? And it's what gives the visualizations needed to understand where to focus effort. Having said that, that doesn't tell the full story, right? Just looking at a pie graph or a line chart on, what people call about or what topics
Mhm.
are causing that might be directionally helpful, but it doesn't provide the context around the why. And it's also, it's keeping people only in their headspace and not really making them feel connected to their customer. All the while, we have marketing teams and market research teams spinning up elaborate programs for customer immersion and customer interviews because they want to feel connected to the voice of their customer. And the reality is that they can be connected to the voice of their customer immediately by tapping into the conversations that are happening all day every day. So the way we strike a balance between structured and unstructured data is we use technology to surface the most impactful, gripping components of a conversation. We are able to tag and label them, and then users not only see the data visualizations and this kind of the things they need to see from an aggregated perspective, but they're able to then listen to compilations of the actual customer voice. We call them call montages, where let's say we have a client that really cares about what customers are saying about tech support. And so they can go into their montage library in Authentix, and they can see that this problem is occurring 40% of the time. The customers are reporting that, and then they can click on a montage and listen to a 5-minute clip of 10 different customers just describing in these conversations their pain over and over again. And when we see leaders hear the actual customer voice that illustrates the theme in the data, it takes them from their head to their gut, and they can't unhear it. And that is what really compels them to take action.
They're feeling the emotion behind the conversation, right?
Yes.
Yeah, I just want to add to that, just because this was what Amy's describing was really impactful for me. It was a light bulb moment, if you will, because from my experience, I had presented what I thought was really compelling charts and graphs so many times throughout my career, and then to see it just not really acted upon. So when we combine the sort of objective with the subjective, and to see the action items that are taken and see the impact that it had, for me, that's just where it all comes together with what we do.
For our listeners, would you take a moment and describe in general a customer of Authentix and the types of calls that you're analyzing, and then perhaps an action or two that was recommended out of that analysis?
Sure. So we serve kind of a broad array of primarily healthcare companies. The kind of sub sectors we serve are pharmaceutical, life sciences companies, health insurance, and health and hospital systems, right? So most of us have been a healthcare consumer at some point or the other, and we probably all have had experiences either calling to talk about a bill into our insurance company or into the providers, or perhaps we were prescribed a medication and called the patient services line for the maker of that medication because we were having a side effect. Or perhaps, we had a healthcare claim that was so large and we weren't sure if it was processed correctly. So these are all the different types of scenarios, and there are dozens of other examples of the types of calls that we analyze. But one thing is in common with all of them, and that is these are complex conversations. This is different than, calling in your utility company. These are usually highly vulnerable and emotional conversations with a lot of, protected health information. So one of the themes that we have been able to identify with our clients is this issue between all the complexity of the healthcare system. So customers are often calling into a line, and they're negotiating between, let's say, their doctor's office, their pharmacy, and their insurance company. And they're feeling stuck in the middle, trying to make something happen so that it unlocks the key so that they can get the service they need, or the prior authorization for the surgery that's coming up, or to get a bill paid properly. And What we've been able to do is help diagnose where are the breakdowns in that customer journey for our clients so that they can take action to kind of correct or smooth out that process. And what does that do for the company? Well, besides improving the customer's experience in that moment, what it really does and where it really translates to ROI is, all healthcare is competing based on customer experience right now, and they're all trying to figure out how to retain their customers and keep them from going to the competition. And so it really helps their customer retention strategy.
Amy, even your tagline on LinkedIn is understanding humans, human interaction, right? And as you were describing that, your emotion built as you were talking. I can tell you feel these problems that you're trying to solve. And I think that's fantastic. I'd love to talk in maybe a little bit more in general about artificial intelligence and machine learning. There's so much written in the media today about those two related technologies. So, Michael, to you, what is it? And just as importantly, what is it not?
Wow. Yeah. So let me start with the not part. I mean, so for me, it's not replacing people. It's not a silver bullet. As a practitioner, as someone who works in and with engineers and researchers every day, the promise is exciting. The promise of machine learning and AI is really exciting and it's fun. The reality of it is a little bit different, especially in our space. Really being able to replace listening, being able to replace a human analyst, really understanding the interaction. That's not something that's possible in any near term at all. That's not what AI is for us. But we can do with it is we can leverage it to improve the ability of people to listen. We can help them listen for the right thing. We can help them listen to the right interaction, and we can learn from each other. So the machine can learn from the analysts, and the analysts can sort of learn from the machine. So they can target a little bit better. But it definitely cannot replace them.
I think that's a great point. And Amy, I'd love your thoughts on where Authentix inserts the human into this process. Because I know we talked about kind of those feedback loops and making sure that, as Michael was saying, the machine gets smarter, the algorithms get better. So, what does that process look like at
Yeah.
Authentix?
So, a really important part of our product is this thing we call smart sampling. So, we may take in a large volume of customer interactions, and we use speech analytics to essentially curate what we call a smart sample of interactions that contain content that our clients most want to hear. And that's the smart sample. And that sample goes into a queue, if you will. It's an analyst assisted evaluation process where analyst users can listen to the interaction, they can clip segments of the interaction, they can add further context by tagging and labeling things that perhaps speech analytics didn't, but are important to understanding the nature of the conversation. And that brings value in two ways. The first way is that they're immediately getting insight, and all of their work is being aggregated into data visualizations and things that are immediately available to leadership teams. But the second thing it does is their tagging and labeling of the data is actually improving the machine learning models we have. So it's taking a non-tech workforce whose job it is anyway to listen and understand customer conversations and giving them tools to immediately upscale the value of their work, and also, without them even realizing it, improving the model over time.
I love that feedback loop concept because I think that's one of the litmus tests, if you will, that when I talk with CIOs and IT leaders about when a vendor describes their solution as being AI or having machine learning, is to ask where the feedback loop is. How does the model keep getting better? So many times the answer is, well, we don't know or we don't do that. So I love that you have incorporated that into what you're doing. I know both of you love to poke at popular notions from time to time, maybe. So why do many AI and ML solutions fall short in your minds?
Yeah. Let me start with actually something you just mentioned, which we really highlighted the feedback loop, and that's really important for us. And that feedback loop isn't just like machine learning techniques. It's not just like, hey, how can we apply integrated gradients into this, into our process? And we spend as much time getting, really trying to allow the analyst to feed the machine, and for the machine to send back information to the analyst that's really useful, and to make sure that there's an ongoing cycle of that on a daily basis. So we're always trying to get better, but we also want to understand the model. We don't want to just see the output. We want to try to understand why and what is the model saying, right? Why is it saying this? And that also really helps us improve and have a much more useful or richer feedback loop than we otherwise would. I think that's something that's really important. As much as I love to just really just kind of geek out on some neat little models or something like that, it's not super useful in and of itself, right? It's really all about how are we going to utilize it, how are we going to get better. But then really to get into your question, what I just described I think is a major factor. I think another major factor is um, just implementing an integrated process where our focus is on the action items, right? Our focus is on the actionable insights, not just on some neat results, or some neat graphics, which I love. I mean, I love to do that, but as a nerd, but it doesn't help that much. It's just not that useful.
Yeah, it all comes down to, is it actionable or not? And while it's cool to see keyword clouds and sentiment scores and things that AI can tell us, it doesn't help understand enough to take action on it. The other thing I just want to poke at is that, um, human beings are culturally diverse, and the way they talk about, they may all be calling a company with the exact same problem, but the way they talk about it is
Ah,
formed by their paradigm, their culture, their background, all kinds of things. And my education is social work. And so it is extraordinarily important that if AI is truly to be helpful and successful, then it needs to have some cultural intelligence to it. And so a big part of what we
mhm.
do at Authentix is helping our clients understand the differences in their diverse patient populations. And, we've learned that people talk differently about their healthcare depending on their background. And that's a really important part of the story. And if we're not talking about it, then we're excluding, major parts of the population. So
Mhm.
that's a limitation I've seen in the products that are out there, and it's just not good enough as far as I'm concerned for what leaders really need to make real differences.
Well, let me just share one other thing that for me is the way I talk about what Amy just said, just in a different language, like in my nerd language, if you will. So a lot of people like to talk about AI, and they think about self-driving cars, right? And they think about computer vision. We talk about it a lot within Authentix and my team. We talk about comparing what we do to computer vision. With computer vision, so your inputs are very finite. You have 256 pixels. Your outputs are very finite. It's stop, go, left, right, faster. With what we're working on, the way I describe what Amy just said is our inputs
Yeah.
are infinite, right? I mean, the language, we're processing language, and language is infinite, and how it's used is infinite. Any given single word could have, any number, n number of meanings depending on how it's used, the tone, the inflection, the words around it. Just understanding the problem space is kind of half the battle, it
Yeah.
seems, and sometimes.
I love that you both brought culture into this. We did an episode, oh gosh, a few months back now, where we talked about bias in AI and machine learning, and one of the things that was pointed out was culture. In fact, I think it was Ashish was talking. He's natively from India, and in the United States, when a doctor asks you on a scale of 1 to 10 what your pain level is, you answer. In India, the doctor decides what your pain level is. And it's just a totally different paradigm. So it changes the conversation. And I love that you also have highlighted several times today that it's about the action, because that's near and dear to our heart here on Status Go, because we are all about action. That's why we created this podcast. So I'd like to ask each of you, what's one or two things our listeners should do tomorrow because they listened to our conversation today? Michael, I'd love to start with you, and then Amy after Michael's done.
So Amy talks about humans understanding humans. My just really small part of that is trying to help humans understand nerds and nerds understand humans. So what that really means to me is, how are we utilizing the technology to have an impact? How are we utilizing that to make our people better, to help our people do a better job? And for me, that's the question we should be asking.
Yeah. What I would say to the listeners is if you work at a place that has a source of unstructured data in the form of human conversations, and these don't have to be phone calls, by the way, they could be chats, they could be emails. If you're not leveraging that, even in a really manual, kind of scrappy way to find out what's going on, then you're really, really missing out. So I would encourage you to find out how you're leveraging that data source to find insights. And if you're not, I would encourage you to just run a very simple manual experiment where you're listening to a subset of customer calls and just start to imagine what that could do for your organization if you listened at scale.
I love both of those actions because I know our listeners, as they're hearing your conversations, they may not be involved in healthcare, but pretty much every IT department I've ever known has a support line that has lots of customer interactions to it. It's part of the daily life. And I think they can apply those actions to that work of theirs. I really want to thank both of you for being on our show today. This has been a great conversation. I know that it's a lot to ask sometimes to put aside the daily work and jump on a call like this. So I really appreciate both of you being here.
Thank you. It's been a lot of fun.
Yeah, thanks for having us on. I love talking about this stuff, so it was fun for me.
And I'm thinking we might have you back and maybe even go deeper on this stuff because I think it's really fascinating. And AI and machine learning is just going to grow even more and become more part of our daily lives. So really appreciate it. For our listeners out there, if you want to learn more, visit intervision.com. The show notes will provide links and contact information. This is Jeff Tunn. For Amy Brown and Michael Armstrong, thank you very much for listening.
You've been listening to the Status Go podcast. You can subscribe on iTunes or get more information at intervision.com. If you'd like to contribute to the conversation, find Intervision on Facebook, LinkedIn, or Twitter. Thank you for listening. Until next time.